So I think one of the things that gets lost through with sport and education today is that when we talk about education, people think of only classroom activities, academic activities, writing papers, taking tests, reading texts, solving mathematical problems, maybe doing experiments. And they don't think about education of character and learning how to perform, and particularly learning how to do good actions. So like, even if I have memorized, I could explain to you exactly how to play a piano or something. I can't just play the piano. Or even I've even met people who they know all the rules of a foreign language, like they know the grammar, it's all, they just can't seem to speak it. That performance aspect, being able to put what you know and how you feel and everything into an activity, a performance, is very difficult, but extremely important, because no matter what activity you do later in life, or almost every meaningful activity we have, means not just knowing what to do, but being able to do it, and to do it well or with excellence. And that performance part is the part that we really kind of learn through sport. In a way, sports performances, as beautiful as they can be and as exciting as they can be, they don't necessarily accomplish great things for the world. But the performances that do accomplish great things for the world, again, it's the same basic formula. You have to know what to do, you have to do it, and you have to do it well.
Yeah. And, just talking about this role between sport and education, and originating, with, Pythagoras, but specifically Plato. And you said that Plato saw philosophy itself as a reflection of the athletic struggle. So like philosophy was basically, so sport, like the process of sport represented the process of philosophy in the most in a way to compare it best, right?
Yeah, because philosophy was the struggle for arete, which means excellence or virtue. In other words, to be really good at what, as a person. It represents the struggle for that through testing and questioning. And I think what happened is, in very early Greek culture, way before philosophy, they were doing sports. We talked about this before. They were doing sports as usually in initiation rituals and in other religious rituals, where they were trying to create performances that would teach people about what it means to be a hero, or to be excellent, to have the kind of qualities that were in their mythological heroes, people like Heracles. And so what happened with the philosophers, and I think Socrates was the most famous one, and then Plato, who was Socrates' students, made him really famous by really formulating this into a serious educational system. They took that spirit of sport, where I always think wrestling is the perfect example, because your opponent's resistance makes you better. So by engaging with somebody else who resists you, who tests you, you get better and they get better. So that's an agon, that's a struggle. And so the idea was, by sort of matching yourself up against someone else, you're both improved. And that's the model for education and philosophy. So what you get in early philosophy, people like Socrates, he'd go up and he keeps asking people questions. And it's like verbal wrestling. In fact, I think you said to me once that you got interested because of my paper called Wrestling with Socrates. And so there's this idea of agon, or struggle, and testing of ideas, or testing, just like there's also testing of physical strength and so on. And it's through that process of struggle and questioning that you actually become better. And so that's the basic model that I think that Socrates in particular, and then Plato, and then other philosophers took over. That's why you can't do philosophy like all by yourself. You have to debate. And even today, we, in professional philosophers, present our work to others who ask us questions and combat. And you could say, well, that's not very nice, they're criticizing what you wrote. But no, that's what we want. We want, this challenge, because we know that our idea is, the more questions you ask me, the more you test me, the more I'll understand them better, and the more that I'll get better, and also the person challenging me.
Yeah. And that core philosophical principle of is there unattachment, because the objective idea, or the argument, or the truth is something outside of ourselves, right? And
Right.
so it's like that intellectual curiosity towards that is what oftentimes encourages the process of like pursuing a well-matched opponent, because that well-matched opponent is what creates the best argument or the best skill.
Right.
And so like you have to have some sort of like emotional detachment. Like you can't be upset when somebody challenges you or pushes you or tells you
Yeah.
it's wrong or something like that.
Right. I mean, that's why, and usually most people will experience this. I mean, everybody's going to have, you might have a different relationship with a particular opponent for whatever reason, but an opponent by definition is, somebody who struggles against you. So opponos, which is a word for like effort and also pain, but another word for struggle. And the opponent is the one that sort of causes you to struggle. So by it, they resist, by resisting your advance and so on, they make you work harder. And really, opponents are making each other better because they're both going for the same thing. They're trying to become more excellent in what they do. And by challenging each other, they do that. Now, if you were to challenge your opponent in a way that doesn't make them or you better, then you're not a good opponent. And we have that, if somebody cheats, or, the famous, Nancy Kerrigan paid, or no, Tanya Harding, the ice skater paid somebody to go and injure her opponent so that she would just not be able to compete. Obviously, that goes against the whole logic of competition. But the positive logic of competition, in fact, the Latin word competitio means to strive together. Com means with, and petio means like to strive or to struggle. And so the idea is that by struggling against each other, we become better. In fact, I recently came up with a definition. I was writing a paper about heroes, and my definition of a hero was, or I called it, I said a hero has a particular ethos, to have a particular way of looking at the world. And that particular way of looking at the world is like what I call an athletic ethos, is one where you voluntarily engage in struggle for the sake of excellence, for the sake of becoming better yourself and making your world better, which the Greeks don't, in modern times we think individually, like I want to get better for myself, but for the Greeks, you're always part of a community. And so you only want to get better in the context of also making your community better. So what I say is that heroes ancient Greek heroes like Achilles and Heracles and those famous Atalanta, these famous heroes, they had this ethos where they knew that they were imperfect and they had to struggle to try to make themselves and the world better. And so that's what an athlos was. And they entered into this voluntarily in order to do it. And I think that's what we get in sports. I mean, you go in and you think about, why do you wrestle? Why do you go through all that sweat and pain? It's to make yourself better. You could say it's to win, but that's not a good answer because winning doesn't have any intrinsic meaning. I mean, what's that? Yeah. And it's very possible to win. I think, is to win without getting the thing that made winning good. What you want to be, I think we've talked about this before, you want to be is the kind of person who deserves to win. You want to have that excellence that makes you deserve the win. So the struggle you enter into, not specifically to win, but to make yourself better.
Yeah. And this is like something that's just uniquely different than our current like society and culture, right? And like, it says, the final goal of the ancient Greek athletic academic education was always arete. It's like, we can't, as a community of people culturally, say that honestly in the sports world, right? Like we can't, I don't think, at least I don't feel good about saying that out loud, thinking that that's what other people think, because of the fragmentation and the disconnect from that final goal all the time, right? Like people will argue. I mean, parents will, I brought this up with Josh, my co-host, and I asked him, did he get involved in wrestling to be an elite wrestler, or did he get involved in wrestling and then want to become an elite wrestler? And he said it was from the get-go, like from the start, the goal was to be really good at wrestling. And it's like, yes, you want to get really good at something because it is a display of your your approach, your consistency, your ethic, your work ethic, your commitment level, all these things. But the goal was not, the final goal was not this abstract arete, this thing that you're trying to model, the virtue, the excellence. It's not in our culture.
Why isn't it? I mean, when you say as a display of your work ethic and other things, in a way, you could say it's a display of your arte.
Yeah. The winning.
That excellence is sport is a way to display, well, to cultivate, and then and really the display is also a test. When you want recognition, this is actually important. I think that even the heroes, they wanted recognition of their arte. And this was what the original word for the prize was, the athlon. They wanted this athlon, which was really the state of affairs that comes about as the result of your struggle. In other words, so the improvement that's in you and in your community, the good thing you did, you want that recognized. That's part of the athletic ethos, is wanting that stuff recognized. But I think one of the things that happens, and maybe this is what you're getting at, is people, they say, yeah, I want to win the championship, or I want to win this thing, or I want to get a scholarship because it's got monetary value, or I want to win this prize because it's got money. But I think that really the thing that makes the win, the prize, the thing that makes that valuable is the arete that's supposed to be associated with it. And if you had a sport where they just did a lottery, for example, you can win a lottery and people want to win a lottery, but winning a lottery by definition has nothing to do with your excellence. It's pure luck. And in sport, you definitely don't want to win that way. You want to win by virtue of your excellence. If at the beginning of your wrestling tournament, they said, you know what, guys, we're just going to give out tickets and it's just going to be a lottery, and everybody would be mad because it's completely different mindset.
Yeah.
So what I would say is, I don't think it's not there anymore. I just think that we don't talk about it that way. We don't think about it that way. And you kind of don't get much, if you do talk about it or think about it, people think you're a little strange. But I don't know, if you really start talking with people, in the end, maybe they don't say it that way, but I think that that's ultimately what they really value, most people.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, what did you mean by the intellectual aspects of sport? So says deriving access to the intellectual aspects of their sport derives sport of much of its educational value.
Oh, right. Yeah. So I was really fortunate because I was in a sport when I got serious in late high school and college, which was cycling, where I had, sort of sometimes a coach, but I had to design my own training programs and think things through and stuff. And so a lot of sport programs, they basically just tell the athletes what to do. Be here at this time, do this, follow through on this. And they don't let the athlete herself or himself think about, all right, how do I manage learn about nutrition, learn about some basic aspects of physiology, learn about tactics. It tends to be more like, okay, you just do this thing and don't ask a lot of questions. And I think that it's really a shame. I'm not saying that you don't need coaches or whatever, but as a professor, when I'm trying to teach a student to write well, the goal is that I try to, I'd say, correct this and this, put this here and move these words around. But ultimately, at the end of it, I want them to be able to just sit down and write all by themselves. I don't want them just to carry out my ideas and write my paper because I tell them how to write it. And I think that too often sport gets coached in a way, it's just do what I say. And there's not a lot of concern for whether at the end of it, the athlete would be able to go out and design their own training program, figure out their own. A lot of it's because it's, they're very complicated team sports. If you think about things like, football and basketball, where there might be plays and other things that may not seem appropriate, but it's an educational system, So I think that too often we think of athletes, and even in a scholastic, a school context, as these people that can only do this much and just carry that stuff out, and they don't have and as a result, they don't have the opportunity to learn about a lot of the stuff. And I only learned about this because, like I said, my experience was different. And so I was interested in nutrition, and I had to learn a lot of this stuff myself. I was reading books. I was, trying different things. And I think that that was a great experience too, in being creative, finding things out. And then I would talk to other people who were in very organized sports that they just, they basically, and their thing was, I just got to show up at practice and then they tell me what to do. And I thought, well, that's kind of a bummer because you miss out on that side of it.
Yeah.
That's what I think, that's what I mean about intellectual aspects. And that's not to say that all the, just like, responding to a move in wrestling is not also intellectual. I just mean that there's a lot of parts of the athletic performance that are actually not part of the way that sport is taught in schools in an educational context. And that's a shame because you can learn so many other things.
Yeah. And I think that's why I appreciate wrestling so much, is because like, not until recently, so much of your commitment and your training was individual outside of the team component of wrestling. So like in the summertime, in the springtime, in the fall time, you didn't have a team. And so you had to figure out what were you going to do on a daily and weekly basis to make yourself better. And like, I think from an early age, I was creating, little plans of, okay, I'll do 20 push-ups today and then 20, and so on.
Mhm.
And it kind of led me into my own curiosity as to how to create protocols that were, most effective and most efficient at creating, the outcomes that you wanted. And it's also one of the early, I think what it also does is it, it creates that intentional like approach of sitting down and thinking about what to do specifically to get a specific result. So
Right.
yeah, I would agree. I've seen a lot of situations where, a kid won't know how to start practice or even go through practice. They'll constantly stop and what should we do right now? It's like, well,
Yeah.
you're in a wrestling room. You can do like basically whatever you want. If you're here to get better, then I shouldn't have to tell you what you're not good at. You should kind of have a list of that stuff.
Mhm.
And so you can tell the differences, and what I think is difficult. I think what's cool about sports, but it's also, what you see in the mass, or, if you get 30 kids, how many of them are genuinely open to just doing, their own thought process, or have they been trained already to only take instruction? And I think that's being talked about a lot. I think people still mess it up because they're so afraid of their kids failing that they go, well, I can't leave it to them to make a plan. It's like, well,
Right. They might blow it. Right.
yeah, it's like they, and I think that's the hard part, is a lot of people are not willing to
Yeah.
watch their child or athlete fail because they think that that's negative, where it's only negative if they take that failure and don't learn from it. It's like,
Exactly. Yeah.
because otherwise it's just it's a time thing, like every year you're still playing the same game of learning from your failures, getting better and going from there. So yeah, that a lot of people don't do that, especially competition in college. And this is one of the things I want to get to before we go. But like in college, I remember a teammate of mine, he told me a story about one time he came off the mat, and our coach at the time told him, if you don't listen to me when you're wrestling, you're never going to win. Right. And what's
Yeah.
just funny, because this is character stuff. He in response told the coach, watch me. Right. So he was like a very independent person. But
Uh-huh.
you see in college sports, because so much of the outcome is a reflection of the coach, or the coach's job is at potential risk, that they don't want to allow variables to exist. So they try to control
Right.
every variable. And so the way that they control every variable is they say, you have to do something a specific way, because that is, statistically the best case scenario for us to win, which means I get to keep my job and, my
Right.
career. So it is interesting that we take away so much of that individual pursuit. That's why I mean, personally, I don't like coaching. Like at competitions, I hate coaching, because like out of all the moments where you really want to create that curiosity or intellectual capability, it's inside the competition, when there's, maybe there's loud noise from
Mhm.
the stands cheering, there's chaos between, what's going on over there on that side of the gym and over here, right? There might be thousands of people in the space, right? And then, your mom's yelling, your dad's yelling, everybody's yelling. The ref blows the whistle, the wrong whistle. There's so much chaos that, like, why not just let them try to, like, figure that
Yeah,
experience out?
I think too. I mean, and it's a problem because, I mean, as you said, there's one thing you pointed out. One, it's a problem that a lot of coaches are evaluated on the win-loss records of their athletes and so on. When, I mean, I think about, again, as a professor, if I was, promoted on the grades that my students got or their test scores or whatever, I don't know, if that would change it, but, I'm just trying to get them to learn. And so I don't have to worry, if it may be good for them to fail or to not do as well as they hoped, because it may help them to get better down the road. But yeah, the point too about coaching, and there's been a problem in cycling. A lot of the professional riders now they have radios, and they are their coaches are in the cars, and the coaches now have constant contact with the riders. And a lot of people have said it's really kind of ruined the sport, because the riders, instead of trying to figure out the race and figure out what's going on, they get all the information from the radio. So you don't have to be at the front, and you don't have somebody on the team that's paying attention to who's off the front or who's off the back. And so they've been trying to get the radios out. There's a lot of debate. And in fact, in some things like the Olympic Games, they didn't let them use radios. And in the women's race at the Olympic Games, a woman got really way out in front, and the really most powerful teams, because they were used to having radios where they didn't really have to pay attention, they let her get out too far and she won. I mean, it was a great performance on her part, but the fact that they were used to being told what to do, and they didn't get told what to do through the radios. And so the best sort of athletes, the most favorite athletes, failed. I mean, in a way, it's sport, but it's also an example of how, being an athlete, you want athletes to be as aware as they can of all the different things. So yeah, I get what you're saying too. And when a coach tell me to listen to them during a wrestling match, I mean, I can't imagine. It seems like if you were concentrating, that it would be hard to hear what they say.
Yeah. And some of it has to do with, like, strategy, right? So if I'm winning a match, so for instance, like if I'm winning a match by 7 points, 8 points is a major decision. So the team might need an extra point for the major decision. So
Okay, yeah.
the coach wants me to let them up and try to take them down again. But me as the athlete, I might be exhausted. I might want to try to execute a move that I've been working on, or a specific position that I feel comfortable in. And now this person is kind of hijacking my own match for the benefit of them, maybe other people, right? So it's in those
That
types of
might be, but see, but that
contexts,
might be okay, because in some ways, if you,
it
I
might
mean,
be.
it's
But if you're thinking about the
the individual athlete
yeah, I mean,
as
you don't know what could go wrong either, right? Like,
yeah,
it's only
yeah.
assuming that things are going to go right. And, like, if it doesn't go well, then whose fault is it then? And, like, and why was it important for that athlete to sacrifice their own performance for the performance,
Oh
or the
yeah,
lack
and
of
that's a
performance?
real problem, right?
Yeah, in
Yeah,
wrestling, I
well,
mean,
it's a
it's not
real, I
really.
mean, a lot of coaching ethics are really involved in that. But it's still, it's one thing to command an athlete to do something. It's another thing to inform them of, what's at stake, which seems
Yeah.
like a much more, like they say, look, if you can take this down one more time, you may help the team to get a bigger thing. That's a different thing than just saying, look, I want you to do this because, it's supposed to be for the team and not any goal that you may have. I mean, I don't think that's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a way to always be, objectively viewing the experience, that's one thing. But I think it always seems, I mean, I would say the vast majority are control oriented, as opposed to objective. Like, hey, if you're capable, perfect. If you're not, then you got to do what you've got to do, as opposed to what I said I want you to do.
Well,
And
and I
again, I
and I
think,
think
yeah,
that's why I say in the book that the objective of the coach athlete relationship is, in a scholastic context, is the athlete's education, right? So to be you would have to make an argument that by being controlling, it's actually better for their education. And I don't think you could make that argument.
yeah,
I think that it's probably, as you say, they're just looking out for, their specific interests, and in a way that's exploiting the athlete, and in a way that's disrespectful of the athlete. So.
Yeah, I agree. But jumping into this, I want to talk to you about the issue. Like, I don't know if you'd call it an issue, but the American university college athletics experience. And I'm probably the most vocal as far as like the internet is concerned of people involved in wrestling that don't appreciate or don't like the model of the NCAA,
Mhm.
only because in wrestling specifically, financially, we get taken advantage of way more than say basketball or football and men's sports and even women's sports because of Title IX. They have access to a lot of scholarships where wrestling only has 9.9 scholarships and an average team is 35 individuals,
Yeah.
where college football, I think they have 88 scholarships and like a team is like 95 players. So there's only seven, people that don't have scholarships on football, where the vast majority, 70% or more of a college wrestling program is based off of people paying full tuition. Yet the coaches are making, extremely, not larger than the football coaches' salaries, but they're making, almost now $500,000 a year at certain programs, and then other programs are obviously very, smaller. But again, the athletes are kind of the wrestling athletes are in a tough spot. Plus, the contradiction between so the idea of the NCAA is that you're going to school to get a college education for free, but in wrestling, it's not, because you're not getting it for free, except for, 9.9 athletes. But yet they treat you like a professional athlete, meaning
Right.
you have to be at practice at a specific time. You can't miss practice at a certain time. If you are struggling in academics, it's not that you sacrifice your athletics to go get your education better. You actually are oftentimes encouraged to change your academic approach.
Right.
It happened in my case where I struggled in my history major a little bit, and their solution was to change to communications, as opposed to figuring out practice schedules or something like that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know how to get into college, the dichotomy of like the role of sport and education, and how college institutions are kind of hijacked by this profit driven motive. And then obviously the recent stuff with the name, image, and likeness aspect, where kids are able to make money. So now it's even put more of an emphasis on the financial motivations and less about the educational experience itself.
Well, I don't think that the two are necessarily opposed. I do think that what we were just saying about the relationship between a coach and an athlete at any level is the athlete's education. I'm sorry, in a scholastic context, the athlete's education. I think you can also say that the relationship between the university and the athlete has to be one of education. And in the paper I wrote, I used the following contrast. When I was teaching at Morningside, I had a student who worked in the office and had a work study job. And so she, was paid to do things for me, to do work for not just me, but the other professors. And so in my relationship with her as a work study student, as an employee, in effect, it was appropriate for me to ask her to work on a paper for me, or go to the library, to do tasks that benefited me, because she was getting wages in order to do this work. So that was a relationship where, and it was appropriate for us to say, you got to be here at a certain time. Then the same student was also in my class. But what was appropriate for me to ask of her as a student was completely different, right? It would be totally inappropriate in my class to say, look, do this work for me and I'll give you a higher grade, or I'll whatever, because that's a completely different relationship. And I think one of the problems that we have is that some of these NCAA rules, they treat the athletes, like you were just talking, the obligations are like that of an employee. But in fact, the relationship has to be one, even though you have a scholarship or whatever, it has to be one of where education is the goal. So it's got to be more like the professor-student model. And so the university shouldn't be asking of athletes to do anything for the sake of sport that would harm their educational potential, that would go against this educational idea. So those things, I think it's just kind of gotten out of hand. And some people, and that's why I also think that people say, well, the end game is that you make student athletes employees and they get benefits and blah, blah, blah. But I think part of the problem is they're already being treated like employees when in fact they are not employees, they're students. And so I don't think that being an employee is going to solve the exploitation problem
Yeah.
that we see. And so, it's, again, it comes back to like your example, putting education first. So, and, in the Alston decision, it was interesting. It's not the Alston decision was the one that allowed name, image, and likeness, I think. In the Alston decision, they said that you could give no, this is a different one. They said that the university could give students educational benefits and include like graduate school tuition and those kinds of compensation. And in a way, I thought that was, philosophically the right direction, that it's appropriate for universities to provide educational opportunities for student athletes. But I'm not sure, I don't think that them being employees is going to solve the problems that that a lot of people are aware of in the system.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And I think that there's going to be a side effect of the financial aspect. I mean, wrestling is definitely going to be impacted more so than college and football specifically, just because there's a diminishing point. There's a point of which the people that are involved can no longer afford to go to college because of the financial burden. And so unless college wrestlers are going to get more scholarships, the amount of people that are going to go into college wrestling is going to continue to lower, I think, because it's just financially too difficult for some families and stuff. And so because of that, I think slowly but surely wrestling is going to actually get pushed to the side in NCAA aspects, just because like it's not a $1 billion enterprise right now. And so because it's not a $1 billion enterprise, I don't see them holding on to it unless they can meet the basic requirements of fielding 30 people rosters and stuff like that, which a lot of the smaller there's 78 Division I wrestling programs, and then I don't know, maybe a couple hundred at the lower levels of Division III and so on, and outside of maybe 25 at the Division I level, none of them are financially stable. They're all operating off of donations and revenue streams that aren't guaranteed into the future. So
Yeah.
I think wrestling is going to fade out of college sports over the next 10 years, just because of the financial obligations.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, because they're not, it's not really a revenue sport like football or basketball. And then the women have the legal backing of Title IX, that it can't be discrimination based on gender. So so a lot of the men's minor sports have been, the people who seem to be suffering the most in terms of supplier demand.
Yeah,
But that's because you're looking at a financial, like you're looking at this pie and a certain number of dollars, and so there's like this professional rather than educational model in the whole way people are looking at college sports.
And I think it's honestly, I think it's actually the benefit to lower the amount of exploitation, right? Because if money is so much of a part of it, then that's where the exploitation continues to metastasize, like it gets bigger. The more profits are generated, then it's like the backup quarterback at Alabama signed like a $2 million deal. Well, it's like, okay, if that type of money is possible as a backup to an institution.
You mean a name, image, and likeness deal?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think they created like he had some sort of brand deal.
So they don't even need so some of these athletes aren't going to need any scholarship money.
No, they're not. I mean, there's rumors, and obviously they're just rumors, but there are rumors right now in the college wrestling aspect where kids are getting outside pay to go to certain universities. So now they're talking about, some outside donor being able to figure out, hey, here's here's $100,000 sponsorship so that you can come to this school for a year. Again, exploitation is definitely going to happen when there's money involved. And when there's more money involved, there's clearly more exploitation. So I think wrestling is going to avoid some of it, but it's not I mean, again, my goal or my thought that we're the best possible scenario is to decentralize it to the activity realm instead of the sports realm, right? So like you see in United States, obviously CrossFit has components of competition and stuff, but
Mhm.
there's a culture of the activity itself on the repetitive basis, which I think is very beneficial. And then things like jujitsu culture in martial arts in America, there's gyms across the country, and there's not that much tournaments, but when you get elite, there's tournaments.
Mhm.
But there's grown men who have never participated in combat sports ever in jujitsu classes because of the culture. It's not necessarily only
Yeah.
based
And it's a
around that.
lifestyle thing. Yeah.
which
You
I
being
think, which I think personally, wrestling and the like for societal aspects, like, I just think wrestling is a great way for people to, again, use that aspect of sport to develop a intellectual framework to move forward with. Like, one of the side effects that I think is very important and beneficial, especially when it comes to political thought or political conversation, right? You cannot have a political conversation right now with a vast majority of people because it will get highly emotional right away. And so because of that component, because of the component of wrestling, and I know that most arguments are not going to get physical, and there's no reason for it to get physical. Now I can only focus on the intellectual aspects, right? So I find myself in arguments where it's like I'm laughing because they're emotional, and I'm like, no, you don't be upset right now. Everything's fine. Just think
Yeah.
about the idea and how your idea is not actually making sense. But again, it's one of the things that's a side effect of participating in that problem solving world of
Yeah.
wrestling
Yeah.
that I just think is so pure. It's just
Yeah.
in what other sport does somebody get to slap you in the face and you have to avoid emotional reaction? Because if
Yeah.
that might be one of my actual strategies. My strategy might be to try to elicit emotional reactions so that you get out of
Right.
your game plan. And if you get
Right.
out of your game plan, I am victorious, right? And
Yeah.
so, in wrestling, we have this concept where it's really preached into us: get your mind right, get your mind right. So in those types of situations, you have to get your mind right. You have to be composed. You can't allow that to pull you out of your game. And again, no other sport allows somebody to slap somebody else in the face. I mean, obviously you can't you can't totally get away with it, but if you watched elite wrestling, they're punching and clubbing each other very hard for positional battles that can very easily trigger emotional responses. So I mean, stuff like that is so I think beneficial to culture. And going
Yeah.
into, you can finish up with this part, but the idea, going back into that final goal aspect of what sports, the final goal of sports, and then what you said with this one, a courageous, disciplined murderer, for example, is not a public good. And so, like, getting back to this idea of like what's the general goal of sports, and in relationship to the goal, shouldn't it have to do with this common good for the rest
Yeah.
of society? And it's like, just in general, how do you think is it just through philosophical enlightenment to people? Like, if culture, if Western society started to read Plato and Socrates, would that be the best way for people to go, oh, we can use this to make our communities better?
No, I don't think so, because philosophy is a study of, as you said, how we ought to live. And there's a debate about how we ought to live. And there are techniques, and we have logic, and we have different aspects. But the basic subject of question of how we ought to live is just a lifestyle question. It's something that everybody needs to ask, and so on, and that we all need to consider. And I don't think philosophy is a solution any more than wrestling is a solution, or any other kind of activity. But philosophy can help people engage. I mean, this is what I try to do with my work, is help people engaged in an activity like wrestling or other sports, to see how that can help them to find ways to live a better life. So I don't think that everybody becoming a philosopher or a scholar in the sense of studying philosophy would make them, but I do think if they can learn things like understand the principles of sport, and try to learn from sport, and also those of us that are in a position to actually manage sport, and critique, how the rules are made and what kind of things are rewarded in sport and how they're rewarded, I think is also important, because sport is not perfect. It's a man-made construct. And so what happens is that sometimes it rewards the wrong activities, like you were describing a really good thing. They'll allow you to slap an opponent. They'll allow you to do something that would be inappropriate to do in society. Well, why should they do that? We can say, well, because by doing that, you teach people, or you give people the opportunity to learn how to deal with a public insult and still be civil, treat another person civilly, right? You learn something for that. We talked about, like, why, if deception is something that is really ethically wrong, why do we allow it? And we not just allow it, why do we reward it in sport? And this is, I think, is an interesting question, and it's worth debating. I mean, my short answer is we do it because we want people to learn how to deal with being deceived. It's not so much that we think it's good to deceive, but it's good to have deception in sport because it teaches you how to deal with and anticipate being deceived. So I think those kinds of questions are worth asking, is what good do we get out of this? And too often just with sport, we can't see the forest for the trees. We're just so thinking about the win or our team or something else, that we don't ask the questions like, is this making us better as a society? Is this making people better? And this fits with sport and education, because we've got sport in our educational institutions. And in a way, I think it's great, as a philosopher of sport who thinks that sport has this great educational potential. I really feel lucky that it's taken seriously by so many people, and it's right there in the schools already, who are, bound by their mission to be educating people. But then people they treat it like it's not educational. They don't evaluate it in terms of education. They don't ask, like you were asking, is the way we're running, college wrestling programs the best thing for the education of the athletes involved? And that's the question they have to ask. That's what they are. They're university. If you're running a professional sports team, you can ask different questions. You can ask questions about revenue and bottom line and all that. Now, some people will say, look, college sports is really a professional program which is subsidizing these other educational programs. So somebody might say to you about your wrestling program, they say, well, look, college football is generating all this revenue, that some of which trickles down to your wrestling team. That still doesn't excuse, treating people like anything other than students, because that's what they are. And that doesn't excuse having, even that doesn't excuse having a program that is not run according to its educational goals. I mean, that's what it has to be. That's why you have those programs. And it's really, and so I think that it's not that you would have to study philosophy or Plato and Socrates, but it's that you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of this activity? And is what we're doing contributing to that purpose? And I think this is especially important for sports.
Yeah, asking good questions is the solution to most things.